The Gerontological Society of America, Advancing Innovation in Aging. GSA on Aging. I'm Howard Diggins, social media editor of The Gerontologist, a publication of the Gerontological Society of America. I interviewed Rowan Kate. She's a doctoral student in the Department of Sociology at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Her paper, A Closer Look at Loneliness: Why Do First-Generation Migrants Feel More Lonely Than Their Native Dutch Counterparts, appeared in the special issue of The Gerontologist on immigration and aging. Then I spoke with my mother, and I asked her about people in her life who were first-generation immigrants to the United States. Thank you so much for agreeing to take the time to speak with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really a nice opportunity to talk about the research.
So you have a recent paper in The Gerontologist about older migrants to the Netherlands. Can you tell me about your study? What got you interested in this topic?
Yeah, sure. So I started with this PhD project last year, and the project is about the social well-being of older migrants living in the Netherlands. And when I started reading the literature, I immediately was struck by this finding that older migrants experience more loneliness compared to native Dutch. And this was also found in other countries, that older migrants are more lonely in comparison to natives. And for instance, a Dutch study, the longitudinal aging study of Amsterdam, found that, for instance, the Moroccan and Turkish older migrants, that more than half of them feel lonely. So that's such a high number. And for this first study, I wanted to have a better understanding of that higher loneliness and exactly why they feel more lonely in comparison to natives.
Can you tell me a little bit about migration in Netherlands? It's a topic that I'm not familiar with, and I'm sure readers of the Gerontologist will be very interested to get a little more sort of background.
Yeah, so in the Netherlands, the majority of older migrants come from either former colonies of the Netherlands, such as the Antillen, or they come from countries that had a guest worker agreement with the Netherlands, such as Turkey or Morocco. And we also have more recent migrant populations, for instance, coming from Syria or Afghanistan. But the majority of older migrants moved here in the 60s, 70s, or 80s.
Was migration slowed in the Netherlands, or is it more of a guest worker program in contemporary times?
I think the Netherlands doesn't have many guest worker programs anymore. I'm not really an expert on this topic, but in general, many Dutch political parties want to decrease the migrants, the migrant streams coming to the Netherlands.
So the migrants that you're that are the subject of your research, are those individuals, are they citizens? Are they entitled to full social welfare benefits?
Yes, they are Dutch citizens. We use data from Dutch statistics. So every Dutch citizen is recorded in that data. So in fact, they are Dutch citizens. They are entitled to health care and social welfare benefits. And we focused on first-generation migrants. So those are migrants who were born in a different country and whose parents were also born outside the Netherlands. Yeah, so for those first-generation migrants, it might be also a different experience living in the Netherlands nowadays compared to for second generation migrants who grew up in the Netherlands and might know the culture better or might know the language better. So it could be different for first generation migrants how they experience living in another country when they are older.
So, what were the main findings from your survey? I think you're starting to hint at it, but what did you find?
Well, we wanted to explore. I wrote this paper together with my supervisors, Bashak and Nardi, and we wanted to really understand whether migrants experience both social and emotional loneliness, and what aspects of their social relations can explain that. Because in most research, there's not really a distinction between social and emotional loneliness. So we wanted to better understand what type of loneliness they experience. For instance, social loneliness is more about missing a broader social network. For instance, not having that many friends or not engaging in any social activities. Whereas emotional loneliness is more about missing close personal connections. For instance, if you miss a close friend, or if you don't have a partner, or if you cannot call your mother every day if you want to talk about something, that would be more emotional loneliness. And we found in this study that in comparison to native Dutch, we don't have a migration background, that migrants both are more socially and emotionally lonely. So that means that they both miss a broader social network and that they don't really have these close personal connections, which is very sad, actually, to have that finding.
So you also had some very interesting findings about the engagement in social activities and whether engagement in social activities had what you would expect to be a protective effect on loneliness. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so we have to keep in mind that this is a cross-section study, so it's difficult to say whether it really has an effect or not. It could also be the case that certain people engage or have more reasons to engage in social activities. For instance, if they are lonely, that they have more of a reason to engage in these activities. But what we found was that in general, social activities such as going to a restaurant or going to the movies, that does have a protective effect against loneliness. That social activities of clubs, so activities that you do in groups, was not protective. But again, it's difficult to say whether this is because it doesn't have an effect or whether those people who engage in these activities are from a different age or from a different background. So it's difficult to say what really is behind this effect because it's such a cross-sectional study.
Sure. So you have so you offered some suggestions for future research and potential interventions. Where do you think that this line of inquiry should go?
Well, I think what we really wanted to do is have to have a first impression of the feelings of social and emotional loneliness among migrants. So I think future research should go into more detail, for instance, how they experience that type of loneliness. And this could be qualitative research, where you can really go into their personal life stories and their daily life and how they describe their feelings of loneliness. For instance, is it described as boredom? Is it described as feeling misunderstood or not having anyone to talk to? So I think this really calls for qualitative research where you have a better understanding of their experiences, of the experiences of migrants. And it's also needed to look into more detail how this differs across the migrant population. Because it's such a diverse population. You have people coming from different countries who migrated to the Netherlands because of different reasons. And people might have learned to speak Dutch or not. Some people may have come from countries that have a different culture, or some might have a similar culture. So it would also be very important to study into more detail across the migrants population, what type they experience, or what type of loneliness they experience, but also who exactly feels that way or not. So it's important to not generalize across the migrant population. So that has to be something for future studies to take that into account.
One factor that I'm curious about is the role of family members in loneliness, especially if people are from a country of origin where there isn't a large community, but they might have family members that either migrated with them or that married and started a family after they migrated. So I'm wondering if those family relationships had the expected effect.
Yes, they did actually. So in general, having, for instance, a partner at home is protective against loneliness, but also having more contact frequency with family is protective against loneliness. And we also found that in comparison to native Dutch, migrants actually talk to their family members more often. So they seem to have more often a partner at home, more often to have their children living with them at home, but also to talk to other family members more often in comparison to native Dutch. But still, they were more lonely in comparison to the natives. So in general, yes, having family members around you is protective and makes you feel less lonely. But for migrants, it still seems like there are some other things that make them lonely despite having family members around them. So what we wrote in the paper is that, for instance, they could have certain expectations from their family members that may not always be met. For instance, if older migrants expect their grandchildren to, let's say, speak Turkish, but the grandchildren do not, well, that might be a source of discomfort or dissatisfaction, and could also make them feel lonely if they could not interact with their grandchildren if their grandchildren don't speak the same language. So in general, family helps against loneliness, but for migrants there might be some expectations that don't come true with regards to their family members.
That's very interesting, because you would think it would have a strong positive effect, but what you seem to be saying is that it's not, that it doesn't eliminate the difference between migrant and native born.
Yeah, so I would say that having family members around you is protective, but if you're not satisfied with those social relations with your family members, then you may still feel very lonely. And that's what we found, because migrants were less satisfied with their social relations in comparison to native Dutch. And that's also something that I want to explore in future studies, whether and how migrants describe this dissatisfaction and why they're less satisfied with their social relations.
I wonder if the acculturation of the second generation family members might have an impact there.
Yeah, I wonder about that too. It seems like there could be like a certain difference between generations in terms of their acculturation, and that would be certainly very interesting to explore in future studies whether this difference could also contribute to being unhappy or feeling lonely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
certainly.
Right. So your children and grandchildren are now not following traditional cultural practices, and now there's a separation that's grown up between the grandparents' generation and the children and grandchildren. So,
Yeah.
Rowan, you described some qualitative research that sounded very interesting. Are you working on that now? Tell me what you're currently working on. Was this part of your doctoral dissertation, and where are you in that process?
Well, I finished this first part of the project, namely this paper published at the Gerontologist, and now I'm working on qualitative research. I'm doing my data collection at the moment, where I'm interviewing older migrants living in the northern Netherlands. And during those interviews, I ask them how they enjoy living in the Netherlands and what things they like, what things they don't like. I also ask them questions about their family members and friends, but also about their country of origin and whether they miss things from their country of origin and whether they are satisfied or not with their social relations and if they ever feel lonely. So I'm really, with this qualitative research, going into detail about their experiences and their daily life and their social life.
That sounds really interesting. Will that be the bulk of your doctorate, or is there a third project?
Well, this data collection would hopefully lead to the future projects. But I also want to write a paper about the data collection because, for instance, I encountered some language issues and some ethical considerations in terms of studying and interviewing older migrants. So I also would like to write a paper on that from an outsider perspective, because I'm a native Dutch researcher. So I also have to consider how that influences the data collection in terms of language or cultural differences. And besides that, I'm also quite young compared to the participants of the study, so that might also play a role. So I would like in terms of the entire PhD project, I would also like to write a paper on that, on how the data collection went.
What are the ethical issues that arose?
Well, I mainly, what I meant was that in general, it might be hard to explain what exactly is expected from participating in scientific research. So I always explain to participants what I am doing and why I'm studying this topic and what the interview would be like. But it could be the case that sometimes people don't really understand what scientific research means, or that they say, yes, I would like to participate. But then it could be also because of language difference that they say, yes, I want to participate, but they did not really know what I was telling them. So I also will work with an interpreter and describe how that went. To work with an interpreter and then to see if that helps in terms of the ethical issues as well.
Has anyone dropped out of your study after having an interview?
So far not, no.
Well, that's good from a data collection point of view.
Yeah. So far I only had instances where I had made appointments, but then participants didn't show up, unfortunately.
So how many more interviews do you need to complete?
I would like to have at least more, in total I would like to aim for 20 interviews.
Mm-hmm.
But you never know with qualitative research when you reach saturation, or if you come across some other interesting topics that you would like to explore.
How are you handling the diversity of the cultural background, country of origin, as you plan that round of interviews?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question. So what I decided to do is first focus on one a migrant group, so that I have a clear understanding of one culture and one cultural background before I would move on to another group. So I started with interviewing Turkish migrants so that I first have a good idea of what their experiences are like before I would decide to go to another or study another group.
So, in addition to the Turkish immigrants, what other groups do you anticipate working with?
I would also be interested in working with the Moroccan group, but with qualitative research, you never can really plan the entire data collection. So if this data collection with the Turkish group has really valuable and rich data, then that would also be a great starting point for a paper and future studies.
That sounds great. So, Rowan, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me this morning. It was very interesting and very informative.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me for this podcast. I really enjoyed talking with you about research.
Thank you. And I want to wish you best of luck in your doctoral dissertation research, and we look forward to seeing more of your results and findings in the Gerontologist.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm also looking forward to writing more about the project.
Hello?
Hi, Mom, it's me.
Okay, what's up?
Oh, nothing much. Just talked to an interesting researcher about older immigrants to the Netherlands, but I'm curious about something and whether you have any point of tangency. That they did some research on people who emigrated and they're in a new country and now they're older and have a very different experience of social isolation and loneliness than just sort of native-born people who are elderly. So one thing I'm curious about is what you think life was like for your parents or grandparents or maybe daddy's parents who were first-generation immigrants.
Oh boy, well, Daddy was first. My father was first generation here, and he came with a friend.
Right.
A friend from his hometown. Who, as a matter of fact, I met him any number of times. He remained friends with Daddy. Excuse me. Basically until Daddy died. And then I saw him a few times after that, and he died not very long thereafter. Grandpa was very close now about his life in Russia. Actually, he lived in a small town outside of Kiev. So I guess you could say he was, that we're Ukrainian.
Was he connected to other immigrants from Russia or Ukraine or the Jewish community?
Yes. I don't know about the Jewish community, but the immigrant community. He got the job with an organization called AMTORG, AMTORG, which I have a feeling was at one of these Russian organizations that either helped settle immigrants or kept people connected to their roots. He grew up in a very religious house.
Mm-hmm.
He went to shul from the time he was 3 years old. So he spoke Yiddish. He probably spoke some Hebrew. I don't know because he didn't speak it at home. Nobody in the house spoke Hebrew. My mother didn't. My grandmother didn't. Her family didn't. But they spoke Yiddish.
So what about your grandmother? I know she lived with you and your parents.
That was my mother's mother.
Yeah.
And she had come from Romania in the early, either the late 90s or the early 10s. I'm not sure. And she spoke English. She spoke Yiddish beautifully.
So I guess the question is about her identity and whether you think that she was lonely or isolated in any way. She had your family,
my grandmother?
lived together. Yeah. I know it's kind of hard because you were a
definitely.
child to think about that, but
I can see back on it. She was very, very isolated. She did have some friends that I don't know whether she made them here or she came from Europe with them. There were some Romanian friends that she had because they used to sit and talk Romanian Yiddish. I can remember that. The Yiddish was not the same as the Yiddish my father spoke. But I would definitely say she was isolated because there was nobody around. I mean, we were living in the Bronx, all the way up north, and there weren't the kind of social activities in the neighborhood we lived in.
what resources or steps could be taken for first-generation immigrants who don't have a lot of connections in the country where they're living, but they're now older?
Well, I think they have to be connected with people from their area, from the area that they came from. They have to be guided towards people who speak the same language, who may live in areas that make it convenient for everybody to get together. I don't know. You see, things today are very different from during the Depression and World War II. It's very difficult to make that kind of comparison from them then to now. Many of the people who are coming now can take advantage of the internet.
The experience of my mother's father and her maternal grandmother seem to parallel the scholarship that Rowan talked about. I just want to try and make the connection here because what Rowan found was that people were socially isolated and emotionally isolated. And these first-generation immigrants in my mother's family did experience some of that isolation, although they did have thriving immigrant communities in the United States. Their experience was very different. It was structured around massive waves of migration around the end of the 19th century and around the Depression, around World War II. But I think some of the same social forces and emotional forces were at play in their lives. And who knows what they would have said if they had the chance to be in a focus group. Thanks for listening. To learn more about the Gerontologist and to read its latest articles, visit the website at www.geron.org. The Gerontological Society of America was founded in 1945 to promote the scientific study of aging, to encourage exchanges among researchers and practitioners from the various disciplines related to gerontology, and to foster the use of gerontological research in forming public policy.